Welcome back to another video, and today is an exciting one, so I will be ranking all the 18 indie eyeshadow palettes that I tried during the year 2023. So yeah, this is the third and the second last part of my yearly ranking eyeshadow series, so after this there will still be my ultimate top 10 of the palettes I tried for the first time this year. And just like with the other videos in this series, these are palettes that I tried for the first time this year, and also if a palette has been decluttered from my collection earlier, then it's not obviously included in this video. But now let's get to the palettes themselves, and I do have to say this was the most difficult one of these. I think it just shows that I already discussed this in my higher end palette ranking, that in terms of palettes, I think indie palettes have been the most exciting type of palettes that have come out this year, and I think that also shows particularly when we are getting to the top end of the palettes that I like the most, that how difficult it was actually to decide in between which one ranked up of which one. I definitely say the palettes on the lower end of this ranking that we will start from, with those there were clear, I'd say it was more obvious why they ranked where they have been ranking. But especially at the top, I do say that the competition in terms of indie palette has been very, very intense this year. But now let's get to the palettes themselves. So first let's get to the sort of bottom end of the palettes. So in place 18 and 17, and I think if you have been watching any of individual reviews from these two palettes, you probably aren't surprised. So these are the Oden's Eye Holiday palettes this year. So this year Oden's Eye came out with they re-released their Christmas palettes from last year, which are still one of my favorite palettes. However, unfortunately, these two are the lowest ranking. And these are purely lowest ranking because I believe these palettes do have a lot of quality issues with them. And there are some Oden's Eye palettes that are much higher ranked that I got this year within this ranking. And I think especially compared to them, it's quite obvious so why these rank lowest. So first, this is the one that ranks 18. So this is the Hey Reindeer palette. And I do think from the two palettes, this definitely, they should have gone back to the drawing board with this one in terms of the formula. So I'm gonna just quickly show how this looks like. Let's see which I think this way we will be able to work with. So in terms of color story, it's a bit different, but I actually like this kind of combination. So we have some pinks and blues, and then there's the pop of orange in the bottom. But first of all, with the mattes, so this is I think what has disappointed in me the most, both of these palettes, so with this one and the one that has the snowman in front of it. There is something wrong with this matte formula. So with Oden's I have been used to the fact that the formula builds itself, you only need a couple of layers. However, with this one, for example, this blue, really, I think it's I layered this 4 or 5 times and it still looks more white, like a white base on my eyelid, even though I do use a separate eyeshadow base. But it's not only with the lighter blue shades, because you could say that, oh well, sometimes with pastel shades things happen, but with also the mid-tone shade there's issues. So this pink one and even these two blue ones, so this more turquoisey blue and then this more sort of traditional, I'd say this is a baby blue or something. I really like with Oden's Eye, particularly with their mid-tone and darker matte shades, I haven't run into this issue where I really have to work with them and build them to make them show up. Also with shimmers, particularly with some of these darker shimmers, so these two at the bottom and then this in the middle, you would expect that these would be very opaque shimmers that really show up, but similarly the base of these shimmers is much thinner than in shimmers that in other Oden's Eye palettes that are similar color story and similar depth. But I haven't had the issue with them that the base is so thin that you basically also have to layer them quite a lot. And that is also something that, because this palette itself, there's only really one deepening up shade, which is this dark brown over here. So I thought that okay, then I can use these darker shimmers to darken my corner and I can work with them, but it really takes quite a lot of work. So yeah, altogether I'm quite disappointed in this, and I say the Snow Dream palette, so this one which I rank a bit above, is that this has very similar issues. I do feel that the mid-tone mattes in this do work a bit better than in the Hey Reindeer palette. However, also with this one, the more lighter shades, so this orange one, this light green, this yellow, this sort of matte white. Similarly, I have to do a lot of building that I haven't been used to doing with Oden's eyeshadows, and similarly with the darker mattes in this one, so this one and then the purple up here, you would expect them to have an opaque base, but you actually do have to layer them again a bit to get them to the depth that they look in the pan. So yeah, I'm not exactly a fan, and something that I did like think when, I'm gonna see if I will be able to show this. And something like as a general, sort of general thing was that particularly with the shimmers they chose, these have quite a lot of similar shimmers in between each other. So last year's Christmas palettes, they were both like, if you bought only one or if you bought them together, there wasn't the feeling that you got similar shades, they were different enough. However, within these one, I feel that there's quite a lot of golds going on here in between these palettes that do look quite similar once you get them to the eye. And then you also have these sort of like these darker shimmers, for example, these sort of base brown shades. So this one and this one, they look very similar on the eyes. And also this purple and this sort of like grayish purple. So I also don't think you actually get that much variation in terms of shades in between these two palettes. So again, something that's going really against these two, but yeah. That was sort of my collected review and thoughts why these ranked the lowest. I definitely say, and there will be like, if you're looking particularly pastel palettes, there will be better ones ahead in this ranking, but these two, unfortunately, not the best Odens I came out with this year, and thus they are the bottom of this ranking. So next is a palette that I actually got as a Christmas present last year, but because I got it at the end of the year, I have tried it in the beginning of this year. So at number spot 16 we have this one. So this is the Smoke and Mirrors palette by Glossgods. And in terms of quality, there isn't actually anything particularly wrong with this one. I do think this is the very stable Glossgod quality. So that is why it's already like ranking above the Oden's Eye ones. However, this is purely ranking the lowest because of the color story. So you probably know that I'm a person who doesn't like straight out gray palettes. And this is very the sort of like, if you really like your smoky eyes, then this is actually a very good palette. Unfortunately, this was a limited edition palette, so you can't buy this anymore. But for me, this is purely in terms of color story perspective, it's just something that I don't gravitate towards too often. Also, something that did like put this on the bottom is that there's actually quite a lot of dupes within this palette, at least on my skin tone. If you have a different skin tone to me, it could be that this the shades actually look different. However, for example, the white one up here and then the silver white here, these look both practically similar shade of silver on my eyes. And also within these, the two brownish bronzy shimmers, these also look very identical once I get them to my eyes. And then even these two like reddish matte shades and then these sort of darker gray shades over here. So I feel that even though this has quite a good matte to shimmer ratio, a lot of the shades, this could have been I think a 9-pan palette and it would have still, I would have still gotten the same looks that I get with this one. So yeah, that is just purely because of the color story and because this has quite a lot of internal dupes within itself. That is why it's ranking on the 16th spot in my ranking. So then at the 15th spot is this one. So this is the Serenity palette by Cosmic Brushes, or I do believe they have been now rebranding themselves as Cosmic Beauty. However, I will be referring to these palettes as Cosmic Brushes palettes within this ranking. So this is at the number 15 spot purely because of the color story. So I'm gonna show the color story. So this quality-wise, there's nothing wrong with this. There will be other Cosmic Brushes palettes. So I have basically tried all the Cosmic Brushes palettes this year because this is the year that I started buying from the brand. So I know this is their oldest one, or not the oldest. I do have the Royal Rose in this ranking. That is actually their like first palette. But I have bought and tried all of the palettes this year from the brand. And this is purely here because of the color story. So you probably already know that there are particular types of blues and purples that I don't like. to use, or I don't use them a lot. So, and this is also perhaps the reason why I didn't buy the Winter Wonderland palette that released from the brand at the end of the year, because this already has quite a lot of the sort of bluish and this sort of brighter greenish and purple shades that I don't really use that often. And as a whole, I really wanted to try this palette because it was so popular, so this was perhaps one of the palettes that I bought because of the hype that it got. But in terms of color story, it's just something that I don't use that often, especially compared to the other Cosmic Process palettes that I do have within my collection. But quality-wise, there's nothing wrong with this. It's very on par with the rest of the palettes. It's just that because of the color story, that is why it ranks on the place 15 within this ranking. So we are now on, I think, 14, and next will be an Adept palette. So here is the Minka palette. And why this ranks at the bottom, just like with the Cosmic, so now we're getting to the point that almost all of the palettes there aren't that sort of like very high quality issues. There are some that I will then get to them when speaking about the palettes, but for example with this one, nothing wrong with the quality. It's very sort of stable Adept quality that I've gotten used to. However, why this sort of ranks where it does is that first of all, it's almost an all shimmer palette, but for example, the first reason is that it did come out with 2 mattes. However, the 2 mattes aren't enough to make this as a palette you can use on its own. You will still need to take other palettes in order to create cohesive looks, unless you really like your all shimmer looks. A second reason why this ranks is where it does is that actually a lot of these shimmer shades, why they look nice when you swatch them and swatch them on your hand, a lot of them end up looking quite similar on your eyes. So especially these sort of more silvery like shades in the top row and even in the bottom here, they end up looking very similar. So the reason why this ranks is not necessarily because of the quality, but because this isn't exactly the most diverse palette, even though it perhaps some of the shimmers in the pans makes it look like there is a lot of diversity in it. So yeah, I don't think there's anything else to really say about this. If you really like your cool tone silver shades that have a bit of shift, then this is actually something that I would recommend. But for me, in my use, it doesn't really offer that much variety. Next we will be going to the palette that's on the spot 13, and this is the Blend Bunny Sugar and Grunge palette. And I think this is, I do believe that I already told quite a lot in I did the sort of new makeup news tag video that's already out on my channel, and I already spoke quite a lot of why this is, from the palettes I bought and in palettes especially, this is one of the disappointments of this year. So there is another Blend Bunny palette that is ranking quite high in this ranking, and when talking about that palette, it becomes quite obvious why this is on spot 13. So in terms of color story, the good things. In terms of color story, this is a very like something that I like. It has a bit of these pastel shades, but then there are also darker blending out shades in this one. And the shades, the sort of mid-tone shades and the deepening up shades, these there are no issues with. They work very beautifully. They are this very stable Blend Bunny quality, and something that the brand has been very known for are their like matte shades. However, why this ranks so I would say in the lower bottom of the ranking is that the pastel shades in this row, I don't know, did I get a bad palette or something, but I really have to build these pastel shades. And that is something that I don't have with the Blend Bunny palette that I'm ranking like much higher than this one. Similarly with the shimmers, some of the shimmers here in the bottom, they were very hard pressed when I already got the palette, and I really have to dig in my fingers in order to get any sort of payout from them. And also a lot of the shimmers, while they look opaque in the pan, they actually are more like topper shades once you get them to the eyelid. So if you really want to sort of get the full impact of them, you actually do have to also layer the shimmers. And I'm a person who uses fingers with the shimmers, so I should, like with my finger, get the most like payout with them. And I'm not actually sure how these would work with a brush. So yeah. So I had quite a high expectation for this, because the first Blend Bunny palette that I got and tried before this, I sort of had very good impression from that one. So then when I tried this one, the disappointment was quite big. So I haven't actually tried or bought new Blend Bunny palettes after I bought this one. It wasn't necessarily because I was so disappointed in this, because I do still believe that the brand can deliver like good quality palettes, but the color stories they have come out with haven't just been something I'm interested in. But yeah, this was perhaps one of the like disappointments of the year compared to the expectation, and for example also the cover art and the whole idea of this palette was something that was really appealing to me. It's just that the quality of some of the shades was something that did let me down, and why this ranks at the sort of bottom half of this indie palette ranking. On the spot number 12 we have the Glossgods Lavender Skies palette, so it's this one, and this was one of the two palettes they came out with this during the summertime. And I have to be careful with this one because unfortunately mine got a bit broken on the transit. However, the brand was very kind and they refunded my whole order, and I'm gonna see if I will be able to make this fit on the frame. Yeah, so you will be able to see it. And the reason why this sort of ranks where it does is that you can use this as a standalone palette. So in terms of there is enough mattes and enough shimmers in this that you can use it as a standalone palette. However, why this still ranks perhaps lower than some other palettes is that quite a lot of the matte shade, this is an issue perhaps that the sort of earlier, the Glossgods palette I showed had, is that quite a lot of the matte shades actually do look quite similar in this one. So these sort of mid-tone purple shades that the palette have, these all look very similar, and there's actually like only one really, it's this purple here in the bottom that you can get some depth with this one. So initially when I thought and I got this palette I was thinking that oh, there's quite a lot of diversity here. However, actually when you get to some of the matte shades on your eyes, the looks end up looking quite similar, and that's also second reason why that the result is what it is, that quite a lot of these shimmers, why they do look shifty and nice, but actually when you layer them on the purple mattes, also the shimmers tend to end up looking, some of them do end up looking quite similar. So it's a nice, if you really love your lavenders and you want some lavenders with special shades, then this is a good option and I would recommend it in terms of quality. However, just be aware that you aren't going to get super many like different looks out of this one. They will all be some type of variation of a purple lavender look. The next one is also a Glossgods palette, so on spot number 11 we have the Color of the Rain palette, and this is sort of a continuation to the palettes, the all shimmer palettes they had last year. So last year they had the Rainbow palette and the Green Seams palette, and this one again, because I got this on the same order as the Lavender Skies, I do have to be a bit careful with this one. So this is an sort of all blue shimmer palette, and why this still ranks higher than the Lavender Skies? Well, they could have, in my opinion, they could have just skipped the like black individual shade, because if there's like only one matte shade in this palette, I won't still be able to use it as a one cohesive palette, and I just think they should have put another shimmer shade in this and made this like an all shimmer palette. But anyway, in terms of like special shades, even though quite a lot of these are blue toned, I do feel that there are some differentiations within this one. There are perhaps a couple of like dupes that they do end up looking quite similar once you get them to the eye, but I do feel that with this one, even though I can't use this as a one cohesive palette, because the shimmer shades do actually have variation within them, I did rank this higher than the Lavender Skies, and with this one, because it is like most over 90% shimmers, I don't have to I didn't go into this expecting that I will be able to use this as a one cohesive palette, but I was already knew that I will have to dig out another matte palette in order to make this one work. But yeah, just like with the Lavender Skies palette, if you like Glossgods quality, I would again, and if you generally like shifty indie shades, I would definitely start with these ones. And Glossgods isn't also horribly priced for an indie brand, especially if you live within the European Union. So these palettes go for 39 euros or something, and I have been occasionally able to use influencer codes on these, so you might be able to get some discount from these ones. But yeah, another, I think, a very stable good palette from Glossgods, and definitely if you are a fan of these special effects palettes, then something that I would still recommend. But because it's an all shimmer palette and I can't use it as a standalone palette, that is why it's still ranking out of the top 10. For the top 10, I now can say that we will get to the more that were difficult palettes to rank, because I think within top 10, all of the palettes have really something that I really do like about them, and I do feel that makes them kind of unique. And I think generally when talking about indie eyeshadow palettes, what I'm looking with them is the sort of wow experience, that there's something very special about them, because I know I can get a good eyeshadow quality from like these sort of mainstream brand higher end palettes, or even from some drugstore palettes. So with the indie palettes, it's more about them making an impact and getting that wow experience, because I know that there's generally, with the same price point, there is like good quality eyeshadow in the offer, but I think the magic of the indie brands for me definitely is that sort of wow experience. But on the 10th spot is this one. So we have the Angelica Nyqvist and Oden's Eye second collaboration, and I got the Little Ghost palette from that collab. And why this ranks, so already why sort of, and when I ranked the sort of holiday palettes from this year at the bottom. So already, and considering that this and the other palette that came with this one, however, I can only talk about the quality of this one. The release time between these and the holiday palettes, it isn't far off, and most likely the brand has been putting them into the production quite close to each other in order the palettes to make them into their warehouse in time. And I think already the difference is like day and night. So with this one, the mattes, the only like matte that I had issue was this sort of dark purple, the Little Ghost shade up here. So that's a bit stiff to work with. But other than that, I don't have this sort of the mid-tone shades, and even the sort of this pastel lilac shade and blue shade, and even this acid yellow. I don't have to build them up. I need approximately 2 layers and they're basically good to go. And also with this one, with the mid-tone shades and the other sort of dark shades, there is like it's like this very good stable Oden's Eye quality that I've known for them. And with the shimmers in this one, there is like this pink shimmer Boo, this one on the middle. I'm actually gonna swatch it so you will be able to sort of see it. So it should have bit shift from pink to blue one. But aside from the Boo, which is more like a toppery shade, these other sort of shimmer shades here, they have enough base, so they actually look, they have the same opaqueness on your eyes that they do have on the pan. So again, there is like, seems to be a very big quality difference between the shades in this one and the shades on the sort of holiday palettes. So only why this sort of ranks at the 10th, I do have one more Oden's Eye palette within this ranking that is quite high, and why this ranks where it does is that in terms of color story, because this is more purple blue leaning, and this is something that I will most likely reach more for during the springtime. So those are the reasons why this ranks on the 10, and that's mainly due to color story. However, in terms of quality, this is very solid and something that I could like recommend if you're still thinking about buying this. However, I do think this might have already been discontinued and sold out, but definitely a good palette from the brand. On the spot number 9, we now have another Cosmic Brushes palette. So this is the Royal Rose palette. And this is a palette, the brand, this was I think their first like eyeshadow palette they did in this format. However, the Serenity was sort of the palette that made them really popular. And I'm gonna now show how the insides look like. So this is, I think, for me a very sort of summer-esque palette, and that is why it's ranking on the 9th. So in terms of quality and in terms of color story, this is already like something that I much more prefer to Serenity, because it has this sort of, it has quite a lot of pink tones in it, and this sort of purple lavender tones that I like. And it also has these sort of reds that complement it. There are like few pops of purple and blue and dark green, but majority of the shades are actually something that I do prefer. But just the color story, I think, because this is something that I definitely gravitate towards more summer than, for example, like all around the year. That is why it sort of ranks at the 9th where it does. But in terms of quality, this is very on par. There is only the one shimmer shade, this one, which is the Royal Rose. So this is a bit more chunky one, and it's I don't think they have had this formula in their newer palettes. I think they got rid of it because this was quite, it's a bit chunkier. You definitely can't pick it with a brush, and it can get quite messy applying this. But all the other shimmers are like close to the shimmer quality that Cosmic Brushes has put into their like sort of palettes later on, and the matte quality of this is very on par with the newer palettes that have come out after this one. On the spot number 8, we're actually having the first ever Adept palette that, sorry, not Adept, Little Cosmetics palette that I have tried. So this is the Little Cosmetic palette, however this isn't the, because on the springtime they came out with this sort of ready-made palette. However, this is, I only used the same sort of packaging that it had, but this is actually a custom shadow palette that I made. So I think what Little has definitely something that makes them unique compared to other sort of indie brands is that they have this sort of palette maker on their website. So a lot of indie brands do sell like individual shades, and from Little you can buy individual shades from them. However, what I think is definitely like separates the brand is that they actually do have a cohesive palette maker, because I know a lot of people can have trouble like imagining from like just from these individual images of shades of compiling a palette. However, their palette maker is something that makes it quite easier for like I'd say more people. But why this sort of ranks where it does, I definitely for the first time trying the brand's quality in general, I do like it. The mattes are on the, how should I say, you have to build them a little bit, so they aren't, for example, compared to like Cosmic Brushes mattes or Blend Bunny mattes, you do have to build them a little bit. The shimmers, they are sort of, I'd say, very good in the shimmers. Also, they're sort of more shifty shades. These are all duochrome or multichrome shimmers that I chose for this palette. But something that I did notice with all of these shimmers and why it sort of perhaps ranks lower than some other palettes is that you did have to like build them a bit on your eyes. So a lot of these shimmers, they seem to have a bit of a thinner, like the base is a bit more thinner, so there isn't as much color pigment in them. So I do feel that with the shimmers, particularly in this palette that I chose, I did have to like layer them a bit to get them to show up similarly as in the pan. But I'd say if you've definitely been thinking about trying Little Cosmetics, and for example if you live in the European Union, the brand is a German brand, then I would definitely say to like recommend trying them. And also they aren't the most sort of expensive. Like of course if you fill your custom palettes with only the special shades that they have, then it can get quite expensive, but they do offer these sort of ready-made palettes occasionally that are like within the 40 and 50 euro mark, depending how much shades they have in them. And if you don't buy all, if you only like choose a couple of like special shades and then go with basic shimmers on your custom palettes, then I think the prices are very reasonable compared to, for example, a lot of other indie brands. But I definitely say that after buying this for the first time, I am now open to trying more Little Cosmetics palettes, and I actually do also have a lipstick from the brand that I do like quite a lot. So yeah, definitely a good first impression from the brand this year. So on spot number 7 we have a brand that I think is a brand that positively surprised me, and I think like now from when we were looking at palettes, there is something in all of the palettes that really surprised me and made me go like, wow, this is like something very, very different or unique or somehow special within the market. So this is the Gourmande Girl Warriors Wear Pink palette. So this is a collaboration palette they made with Syria Soto this year, and this is a breast cancer themed. So the collaborator, I believe she suffers from breast cancer. I'm not sure, I don't know what the situation with her illness is currently, but this sort of palette was created to sort of raise awareness of the cancer, and also to bring collect like that the collaborator obviously will get proceeds from this, so it will help her with her treatments. But aside from bringing awareness to a very important, I think, theme and an illness that has unfortunately something that affects quite a lot of women, this is first of all how the palette looks like, and I think this is first of all, in terms of color stories, this is again something that is quite something that I like a lot. So it has a lot of pink, so that definitely has going for it. But also what impressed me, so I think what indie brands have become known for is their shimmer quality, and this definitely has some beautiful, like all of the shimmers in this are quite beautiful and they do have some sort of shift to them. However, the second thing that really made me go wow with this, and why this palette now ranks relatively, I'd say, high, is that the matte quality of this was like something very impressive, because I know a lot of indie brands have then struggled when they have expanded to making cohesive palettes. A lot of the indie brands then have struggled with like creating matte formulas, and with some brands matte formulas have been quite sort of hard to work with. However, with this one, what impressed me was that all these mattes they were very easy to build, but also how they blended and how they complemented the shimmers that came out with this palette was just so well done from the brand. And Gourmande Girls has of course, they have released more palettes this year, and I bought this from Monolith Shop, which is an European website that stocks a lot of the US indie brands, which makes it more affordable for us in Europe to buy these brands. However, the color stories that the Gourmande Girls have come out with, they haven't exactly. There have been a couple of palettes that have been like that, have been almost, but then there's like something still in the palettes that make me think that made me think that I will then spend my money on something else. So I'm still waiting for the second palette I will be buying from the brand, but definitely another good first impression from a brand, and something that definitely made me like think that I will have to keep my eye on the brand. So again, like I already said, a palette that I think it is for a good cause, and a palette that I would again recommend if it's still available. However, I don't know how limited edition this palette actually was, but I would also recommend that if you have this on your drawers, then dig it out and use it, because I think the looks because of the mattes and shimmer combination of mattes and shimmers that they are quite beautiful and quite effortless to create. On the spot numbers, I believe we are on the 6 now. I hope we're getting that right. You will see the right number in the corner. So next one, this is the Cosmic Brushes Delights palette, and this was the pastel palette because this summer we had during this summer we had two palette trends. So we had trends of greens, and greens aren't my primary interest of eyeshadow colors, so it was sort of a palette trend that I just skipped completely this summer. But there we also got a lot of pastel palettes, and this is the pastel palette that I chose, and this is something that's a palette that makes it really hard for me, because if you watch my higher end palette ranking, you do know that I have the Natasha Denona pastel palette that I bought in the beginning of the year. However, after trying this one, it is very hard for me to recommend by paying the 60-70 euros when you can get this one in euros. This is somewhere between 40 and 50, because this comes from the UK. And because of Brexit, when you import this to European Union, we do now have to pay the value-added tax when we import this from the UK. But anyway, regarding the quality, I mean, I think Cosmic Brushes, they have a really good formula going on with them. And what particularly impressed me is that being able to do pastels at the price point they did, and in such a good quality. These are very you'd only need a few layers. I would recommend using a white, with all pastel shades, I would recommend using some type of an eyeshadow base, because just while putting them on your skin, then you probably, and also depending on your skin tone, then you would need to work more with them. So something that I will generally recommend when working with any kind of pastel, whether they expensive or cheap ones, use an eyeshadow base to get full impact on them. But with an eyeshadow base, you only need very few layers with this one. And also something that they did, what was different from the other palette, was that they did include multichrome in this one for the first time. So I will show this. I think I did show this already in the makeup news tag video, but again, it's just very, I'd say, impressive what the brand is doing, considering the price point they are offering. And yeah, I'd say this will be again more of a seasonal palette for me. So when spring is gonna come, and it's gonna take a while now because we're now in the sort of now December and getting to the midwinter time, but when springtime comes, this is definitely a palette that I will be using more. And also what I do appreciate with this one is that you can actually use this as a standalone palette. So compared, for example, to the Natasha Denona pastel palette, which is only a pastel palette, and I said it on my higher end ranking that I use that as a companion palette to the Circuit the Loco palette. However, because this has quite a few also darker shades, you can also, I think they did a very smart thing by putting these sort of darker colorful shades in this one, so you are able to use this as a standalone palette if you want, and you don't have to necessarily go to other palettes to sort of get a full cohesive look. But yeah, definitely a favorite from one of the favorites from the brand, and also the packaging was very fun, and just Amazing quality for, again, for the price point that the brand is like selling these for. 5. So on the spot number 5 we're having another first try this year. So this is the Glaminatrix Rich Romantic palette, and this would have ranked probably as one of my sort of top 3 palettes unless the shimmers, if the shimmers were not what they are. So in terms of color story, this is like perfection. Like this would be, I think, a palette that if I did a palette, it would probably look quite close to this. So it has some neutrals, it has some pinks, and it has some sort of more muted purple tones. And the shimmer shades are like, I'm gonna swatch these to my fingers, just a few of them to like show what they are. So the shimmers are like very amazing, very like shifty. They are so beautiful, but all the shimmers in this palette crease away, and I don't have that similar creasing issue with other indie palettes that I do have at this sort of like that I have the issue with all of the shimmers. If the issue would have been with 1 or 2 shimmers, I think it would have already helped this palette a lot. However, I don't know what is it, the formula doesn't feel actually particularly, now when I actually swatch them again, it doesn't feel particularly like emollient. For example, some of the Adept shimmers that they put in their palettes, you can feel that those almost feel a bit like chunky and even like something that you would like really squish your finger in. So, but still, there is something like with the shimmer formula of this that it doesn't just go with my lids. Like I think I mentioned this in the makeup news tag video that I did. I haven't tried these with glitter primer, so I will have to buy a new NYX glitter primer and see that if that helps with the longevity of the shimmers. However, in terms of the shades in this, the mattes are something that you do have to build. However, it's not something that you have to like do 5 or 4 layers. That is just that compared to, for example, Cosmic Process formula, you don't immediately get this sort of very impactful pigment with these, but the mattes, they do like build still relatively quickly. But yeah, in terms of the color story, in terms of the mattes, and in terms of the like the type of shimmers that this have, this is like almost perfect. It's just that the longevity and the issues I have with the shimmers, why this ranks on the 5th and doesn't like rank higher, but it's still like a palette that I love very much. I'm very happy that I got this, and I definitely want to try more Glaminatrix in the future, and I do hope that if I try the brand more in the future, that perhaps the shimmer formula, they will do something more to it so that it lasts longer. But I definitely think that if you have tried this maybe with a glitter glue, then that might actually also help with the shimmers in this one. On the spot number 4, we have now the last Oden palette from this year. So this is the Jewels and Gems palette, Jewels and Gem palette that they came out with this summer. So I only bought this one because, like I said earlier, I sort of skipped the green shadow trend that was going on the summertime because it's not a primary shadow color that I like using. But this one, this is how the color story looks like, and why this sort of ranks quite high. So I didn't actually have expectations for this. I sort of wanted this because this was sort of like Oden's Eyes. It isn't their first neutral palette because they had this sort of, they have the palette that's in the pink cover. I don't remember the name of it, however I do have it in somewhere in my drawers. That was one of their like original palettes that did make the brand quite popular. So I think that is like their first more neutral palette. However, after that palette, all of their palettes have been quite colorful. So this was their sort of attempt to sort of also add some neutrals to the brand sort of selection. And I think why this ranks quite highly, because this again did make me have this sort of wow experience. So while initially I thought that, oh, it has this sort of quite muted purples and blues and let's see how I will get along with this, but actually because of they are muted shades of blues and purples, they are actually something that are for me very easy to work with. Also, I'd say that the combination of shimmers, so when I initially saw this I was thinking that how are the golds gonna work with this sort of more, I'd still say these are a lot of these are quite cool tone shades, but actually because of the shifts the golds have, so the golds have a bit of shift to the more sort of bluish and green spectrum of colors. They actually complement quite nicely the sort of muted cool toned colors that this has. And altogether, I think for the season this was quite perfect because I got the palette during the time when, well, now we have quite a lot of snow outside. However, I got this palette during the time when we were sort of in between season, where we already had the leaves sort of, there were no longer leaves on the trees, and it was generally just quite grey, but there wasn't snow yet, so I was sort of in my grungy mood era, and this sort of, I think the palette fitted, the looks that I got this palette fitted quite along the mood that I was in when I was trying this. But yeah, definitely, and this definitely is again another example what has made me think that what went wrong with the Christmas palettes this year, because I don't have to build these shades like again and again. They're very like effortless to work with, they blend effortlessly, you get very opaque layer, the shimmers are like very special, and again I do feel that the shimmers you get the same result that you see on the pan, and the quality again just seems a lot better than the holiday palettes that did come out later on this year. But yeah, so if you have been like wanting the brand to come out with something more neutral, I would recommend this palette, and this I believe is semi-permanent. I don't think this is a limited edition palette, and because this isn't a collaboration, you can actually use influencer codes with this one, and because also it's not a collaboration, this is actually one of their, because the collab palettes always cost a bit more because obviously the influencer has to get their share, but their sort of staple line palettes, they go in somewhere around the 40 € mark, and then you are able to use influencer codes on these, so these aren't actually like that expensive for indie brands, so also another reason why I would recommend buying this one. So we're getting to the very exciting part, which is the top 3, and my voice is getting tired and I still have another another video to film after this, so and my hands are quite sparkly. So with all the top 3, these were quite, the top 3 was the most difficult part of this. However, what sort of combines all these top 3 palettes is that all of them when I got them and tried them for the first time, and after I have been using them, every time I get this sort of wow, this what I talked about earlier, I get this sort of very wow experience, and I feel that all of these 3 palettes, they sort of made me like perhaps not fall in love with the brand, because I have quite a lot of with this. I have had actually tried the brand before, except I think there is one palette here that the palette was the first from the brand. But anyway, all of this sort of, I got this sort of feeling that these are like very special, and something that I will still like in 20 years remember that wow, that was really an amazing and somehow unique palette. But on the spot number 3 we have this one. So this is the Samarian Sunset palette by Adept Cosmetics, and this I believe was the Star Trek themed. Yes, I'm not tricky, so I don't know that much about it, but yeah. And this is how the palette looks like, and this is one of the few Adept palettes that I can use as a standalone palette. So I have, aside from the Minka that was earlier showed in this ranking, I do have the Plain Jane palette. However, because of the sort of because those are basically all shimmer palettes, I need other palettes to use with them. However, with this one, there is the bottom row of mattes. Unfortunately, this would have probably actually ranked higher if all the mattes were functional. However, the sort of pale yellow matte and then this sort of pale peachy matte here, even on my fair skin tone, I really have to build them, and then they almost still don't show up with me. The mid-tone mattes in this one, they do actually work quite well. They aren't the most spectacular mattes in terms of inequality, but they definitely are like workable, and you are able to create cohesive looks. However, what is the star show truly are the shimmers in this one. Another reason why this sort of ranked 3rd and not higher is that some of these shimmers do crease. The creasing issue is not as bad as with the Glaminatrix palette that I ranked earlier in this video. However, it is still something that I have to consider, and then for example an issue that I don't have the number 1 and 2 palettes. But not all the shimmers in this crease, so Adept has few kinds of shimmer formulas, and the smoother shimmer formula that they use is something that doesn't crease. It's just the bit chunkier shimmer formula that I have a bit of an issue with. Sometimes, it's not all the times, but with some days it happens that I do end up seeing that there is creasing on the eye. But what like makes this so special are the sort of shimmers. I'm gonna swatch, I think, few. Let's go with the 4. So These are just example, and I'd say that every time I have put even if I use only one of the shimmers in my eye, I every time like have to look in the mirror and just like admire how beautiful the looks come out with, because these shimmers, I just think that the brand did so well in formulating these and making them, they truly look something very unique and something that will make also other people look and ask what are you wearing on your eyes. So yeah. So aside from the few like sort of few complaints that I had about the sort of the lighter mattes and then some of the shimmers, unfortunately not being the most long-lasting one on the eyes. However, like I said, it is only with a couple of the shimmers. Most of the shimmers I do last me a whole day, and like I said, it just makes me like, every time I use the palette I get this sort of very wow experience, and the looks and the shifts that the shimmers have are just so beautiful. And I do believe they might be restocking the palette still next year. Keep an eye on their social media. I got mine one on Monolith Shop, so I don't know if the Monolith Shop, which is a European retailer, I don't know will they be anymore getting restocks of the palette. However, check the brand's website, that if they brand's website and social medias, that if you're still thinking about buying the palette, it is a more expensive palette, so do take that into consideration. But if you want to spend the money for it, then I would say that it is definitely worth the investment. And for the number 2 palette, so this is the palette that made me sort of fall in love with this brand and also made me rank the palette we saw previously at quite low. So this is the Blend Bunny Dollhouse palette, and this isn't the palette the brand has come out with this year, but this is one of the first palettes that I tried from the brand this year, and this is something that was stocked on Monolith Shop. And I was initially a bit skeptic that should I really spend the money on it? Is it a bit big? But I have to say that I haven't like regretted a single day of buying this. I'm sorry, I'm really having a bit of trouble today in my getting a good position, but we will try to get this work. So the quality of this is something like, I have tried like a lot of high-end palettes, a lot of other indie palettes, and this is just something that blew my mind away. All the mattes, the sort of more pastel-y mattes up here, and these were the mattes that I was matte quality that I was expecting from the pastel from the Sugar and Grunge palette, which the palette didn't have, and which made me rank the palette so lowly. All of these, like, you only need like one layer and you get the sort of layer you want with them, and they show up. And all these sort of like darker mattes in here, I initially also had a lot of concerns that, oh, these are quite dark here on the second bottom row, that will on my fair skin tone, how that will look out. But actually, because how well these mattes blend, I am able to use also all the dark shades. And the shimmer shades, just like I mentioned, what made me so disappointed in the Sugar and Grunge palette was that some of the shimmers were very hard panned, and they were sort of some of them were almost topper-like. With this one, all of these shaders, they are very, very opaque, and again, you don't need to very dig in your fingers. You will get a good layer with just one swipe. And something why this still ranks second and not the first one is that this doesn't have you don't get super shifty shimmers. Some of these shimmers do have a bit of a shift to them, but they aren't like these sort of like, when I showed the Samarian Sunset palette before this one, this doesn't have that kind of formulas in it, but the shimmers are very beautiful. And I just think that how much I have used this palette during this year and how much I just want to dig this out from my drawer and use this, I think that alone just tells how much I like this and how impressed I have been with the formulas in this one. And I do think that despite this being sort of neutral palette for the colorful lovers, you do actually get quite a lot of different kinds of looks with this one. So again, something that really makes this ranks quite highly. But I definitely hope that, like I said, I haven't been buying Blend Bunny palettes after Sugar and Grunge palette, but I do hope that next time there is a color story that makes me want to buy from the brand, I do hope that it has formula more like this one and not the formula that the Sugar and Grunge palette had, because this formula in this one is like, it's awesome. And now for the exciting part, so which was from all the indie palettes, and I'd say that now that I've gone through 17 palettes, about time we're going to the first one. So, first one is this one. This is the Muse palette from Cosmic Process, and this is definitely something that really made me go. So I made when this was released, I ordered this one and I ordered the Royal Rose one. And the Royal Rose, as I said, ranked where it ranked more because of the color story and how I see it more as a seasonal palette. However, this is another palette just like the Blend Bunny palette I showed, the Dollhouse palette. This is a palette that I gravitate towards all around the year. And there's just like something in this color story that just makes it very attractive for me. So first of all, like all of these shades I have had like despite it having more colorful shades and despite it having more neutral shades, all of the shades layer and blend together so well. I am wearing a look with this today. I made this sort of pink themed look and it will be a reel and a YouTube shorts in my channel. But yeah, just something with the color story, and I think this is like the perfect combination. I have always said that I actually do like a neutral palette with a twist, and for me really why this ranks the first is that this truly shows that a neutral palette can still be fun. And I think this just has the perfect mix of this sort of neutral shades and colorful shades. And something that, for example, I think this continued a lot because I believe last year my favorite palette, if I would have been making YouTube videos, it would have been the original Hella palette from Oden's that had this sort of combination of earthy green tones and yellows with pinks. And I think this sort of continued with the same theme, and I think this also shows was something that did make me, because I have already told that these sort of very bright primal tone greens aren't my favorite. However, these sort of more earthy neutral toned greens along with these pinks and neutrals, I am able to create, like, they make me excited and want to create looks with and combine the different colors with each other. But yeah, I'd say that this is this is like one of, in terms of color story, I have to say that if the Glaminatrix palettes, if I wouldn't have had the issues with the Rich Romantic palette that I had in terms of shimmers, and because of the color story, it would have then ranked first, and this would have been then my second top palette, because again, the Glaminatrix color story was like closer to what is a perfect color story for me. However, because I have no quality issues with this one, and just the price point of this one is also something you can't beat, and just how clever the owner of this brand definitely has an eye for making these sort of interesting color stories with color combinations that you wouldn't initially think that would go with each other. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about this one. This is, I believe, a palette that the brand owner will keep restocking as long as there's demand for this. However, because Cosmic Process is a smaller indie brand, you really should keep an eye on their social media, because they're a smaller brand, they obviously can't like keep stable stock, but they always have to like make a new order once they sell out with their old palettes. But this definitely, when it becomes available again, and if you have been eyeing it, this is something that I would still recommend, and this is like my favorite palette from all the 4 palettes that I tried from the brand this year, and from all the indie palettes that I tried this year. And also, like, aside from the insides, the cover work was also this sort of floral rose themed color picture on the front, like 10 out of 10, and definitely is something that I know that I will be also like keeping using in the future. And because it also offers the neutrals, it offers some colors, I think it's like the perfect combination for me in terms of how I like to use my eyeshadow palettes. So that was hard. I'm glad that's over. My voice is gonna die out soon, but anyway. I hope you liked this video. I would be very interested to hear what have you been thinking about in terms of indie palette releases this year. What have been your favorite palettes? What palettes perhaps didn't live up to the expectations? As always in these videos, these are of course my subjective opinions, and your opinions may vary, and there are just a lot of, I think, indie brands that I am still waiting to try next year, because obviously I, just like the rest of us, I have a limited makeup budget to use monthly, so I can't of course buy all the stuff, and also there is still the question of availability. So definitely, especially if the more like US based brands, like I said, we now have Monolith Shop, which helps a lot for us living in Europe getting these very sort of popular indie brands, but they also only get they only have launches once a month, and of course they can't get stuff as fast as the brands will be able to manufacture them and sell them on the States. So definitely there is still many more indie brand palettes to try, and I am now perhaps hoping that I discuss this on the makeup review tag video, that I, for example, think that I now have my share of these special shade palettes, so I don't need more like individual shimmer shade palettes to my collection. And I think next year I will be more focusing on buying cohesive palettes that have mattes but also have these sort of shimmers that go with the mattes. A palette that will not be included this year, but I will sort of mark it as something that I tried next year, even if I would technically be able to still try it during this year, is that I am getting the Ensley Rain Harvest Moon palette. It is actually now shipping to me, and I think it should get to me before Christmas time. However, because obviously I will be getting it so late this year, it will be included in a ranking next year, because Ensley Rain is definitely one of those indie brands that is more expensive one, but has gotten quite a lot of praise from other creators that have tried the brand. So like I said, a lot of indie brands still that I want to try, but also the fact that I will be perhaps more particular what sort of indie palettes that I'm trying, because prices are getting up also with indie palettes, and I don't think there will be any more use for me spending, for example, my money to all shimmer palettes that I have like now plenty of within my collection, but I want perhaps now more cohesive palettes that I will be able to use as individuals. But I hope you liked this video. Push the like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to get notifications from my future videos, ring the bell button. You can find me also on Instagram at the nickname Makeup Hedgehog, and I hope I will be seeing you in another video soon. Bye bye!